Welcome, folks. This is Worst, your host, and today I'll be narrating a part of the Kourend Chronicles, reading directly off of the Old School RuneScape website for those who would rather listen. Welcome to the Kourend Chronicles, a 6-part series of tales from Kourend's murky past. Please relax and enjoy Kourend Chronicles, Part 1, A Curious Client.
You're after that old tale, are you?
The mercenary chuckled and set down his flagon on the table.
Well, stranger, I hope you're sitting comfortably, because it's a long one.
He stroked his beard and settled back into his chair, its aged joints creaking.
Let's see now. It all started just after they lost the Accord, back in the 135th decade. The lizard men were pummeling the border, and we young recruits were sent out to face them. It was a shame, really. My whole battalion were just boys like me, and we weren't ready for a fight. We were cornered. I got bit, and the others got caught up in the charge, left me lying there in the mud. I don't mind telling you, I was afraid. I thought that was it. That's when she appeared. A miracle. She came storming out of nowhere, cutting down the lizardmen left and right, until they all turned tail and ran. I'd never seen anything like it, or anything like her for that matter. Tell the truth, I weren't certain she wouldn't turn on us next. Her skin was gray and craggy, like it wasn't skin at all. Like rock it was. And her eyes, they were a bit like yours actually, except they were blue, bright blue. And they shone with a strange light that didn't seem, well, altogether natural. No offense, like. With the lizardmen gone, I managed to get myself up out of the mud to thank her. She looked me up and down, said something about maintaining the balance. I was all groggy from the poison, so I didn't pay it much heed. All I could do was keep telling her that I owed her my life, and that anytime she needed a favor, she could come find me. When I finally stumbled back into camp, I slept there for 3 days. Then I woke. I chalked the whole thing up to delirium and thought no more of it. That is, until I saw her again.
The old man tapped his leg with a resounding woody thunk.
After I lost my leg, they chucked me out. But I was young. I could still make something of myself, I thought. So, I was minded to sail east and try my luck on the mainland. Signed up with a trader's crew, ready for a trip to, Port Sarum, I think they called it. The morning I was to set sail, I turned up nice and early, only to be met at the docks by this woman, looking like she hadn't aged a day. Gave me a real fright, I tell you. By the cool light of the day, she was even stranger than I'd remembered, and twice as vicious looking too. Now, I could have walked on by. To a creature like that, I imagine one human looks much like the others. But I'm a man of my word, so I gave her the time of day. And by Sir Alderman, I'm glad I did. Like I suspected, she's here to call in that favor. And it comes with a bonus, 1,000 gold up front. That was a lot back then. All needed to do, she said, was take some old trinket or other over to the mainland and hide it there. There's just one catch, she told me. Under no circumstances was I allowed to open the chest it came in. It all sounded easy enough, and like I said, I'm a man of my word. So I gladly took the job. She handed over the gold there and then. I wouldn't take no for an answer. Not that I really pushed the issue. I thought that it'd make a good start for me on the mainland. Now, obviously I didn't tell the captain about the woman, the favor, any of it. I just kept the chest, big gray and purple thing, in my berth, and told everyone it was full of ugly jumpers from my gran. Nobody so much as batted an eyelid. But we weren't even one night into the voyage
when the chest started talking to me. I was up on the deck, watching the lights of Port Piscarius vanish over the horizon, when I heard this whisper right in my ears. It says, "Take me back." I put it down to the wind that first night. You see, I'd never before been on a boat, so I thought perhaps some trick of the sea, or maybe my crewmates was pulling a prank on the new recruit. But then I kept hearing it. Never during the day, only ever at night. It started out all friendly like. "I can give you power beyond your wildest dreams, this. Wouldn't you like to live forever, that?" I didn't trust it. My formidable lady she was, used to patrol up near that old fishing village in the north. She taught me that there's things in this world you don't ever want to listen to, and I reckon this was one such thing. The closer we got towards the mainland, the nastier it turned. It talked about how I didn't know what I was messing with. It said that when it regained its strength, it would remember my name, and where I came from, and what I'd done. But that just made me more determined not to listen. The last straw came when I woke up one night to find myself standing over the chest with a chisel in my hand, ready to break it open and let out whatever evil was locked within. Knowing I could trust myself no longer, I snuck down to the cargo hold and stashed it behind a crate of bananas that very night. It made the whispers a little easier to ignore, at least. When we landed in Port Sarum, I used my first day of shore leave to hike all over the countryside. And that thing talked to me the whole time. Begging, threatening. I think it knew what I was doing. See, I'd always liked a puzzle, and I thought anyone looking for a thing like this would have nefarious business in mind. I figured I should send any soul who came looking on a hopeless errand, hoping they'd bore of the hunt long before they ever found it. Then there's the best part. I paid a farmer 3 gold to bury it in his pig pen, 'cause who's gonna scrabble around in some stinky hovel like that for more than a minute? Far as I was concerned, I'd held up my end of the bargain. Job well done, if you ask me. I went back to the pub that evening, bought my crewmates a round of Black Skull Ale. The old man lifted his tankard, and I've been drinking it ever since. A half-hearted cheer went up from the tavern's other patrons. The old man grinned, took a long gulp, and then wiped the froth from his beard with a satisfied sigh. The stranger looked on in silence. "So, stranger," the old man said, "I've traveled all over the world and never seen someone like you. What brings you to Kourend?" "Just looking for an old friend," the stranger said. His voice was cracked and dry-sounding, like the inside of his throat was all dust and sand. "Thank you for the story, it was most helpful." The old man nodded politely. "Actually," the stranger paused and pulled out a tattered map from the folds of his cloak. "This is one last thing you can do for me. I've never been to the mainland. Where did you leave that amulet again?" The old man hesitated and then jotted down a few swift notes on the map. "Why, think you'll be taking up farming?" he chuckled. The stranger smiled back at him thinly and then took his leave. The old man finished his drink in silence. Perhaps he shouldn't have misled the stranger. He was old too, judging by the creak in his bones and the croak in his voice, and he didn't necessarily have trouble in mind. But something the stranger said had set the gears in his head turning. After all, he'd never mentioned anything about an amulet. Kourend Chronicles, Part 2, Lab Notes. Pentemper first. I am pleased to report that we have successfully retrieved the majority of the items in the redoubt. With the exception of the hammer itself. We expended just 2 assistants in the course of our investigation, and there's No hurry to replace them? More importantly, it seems our assumption was correct. Each one of Din's creations, with the exception of a few early experiments, are made from the same metal and infused with the same magic that you and I have become familiar with. Although the metal has proved unusually difficult to melt down, I have no doubt in my mind that should we find a vein of the appropriate ore, it would only be but a matter of time before we could fit our strongest soldiers with similar weapons and armor. In fact, I would highly recommend it. However, there have been some concerning developments. Several of my assistants, and even some of the guards, have reported feeling a bit uneasy when working with the objects. Now, as you know, I have very little time for superstitious nonsense, but it seemed unusual for the lizard men to be affected, so I experimented. Alone in a well-lit chamber with one of the lesser artifacts, the first human subject lasted 4 hours and 12 minutes before reporting deep unease and requesting to leave. Their lizardman counterpart managed 6 hours and 20 minutes. Overnight, the results changed dramatically. One assistant, who has since been reprimanded, attempted to hurl one of the objects out of the laboratory window after just 3 hours and 7 minutes. He is currently in the cells. This morning, I found him cowering beneath his bunk, babbling about being watched. Having determined that no physical effects resulted from the exposure, I, of course, attempted the experiment on myself. Armor and weapons that strike deep fear into our enemies would, of course, be highly beneficial. But, unfortunately, after one night's vigil, I was unable to pinpoint the source of the subject's fear. In fact, I felt remarkably at ease. I'd go as far to say as that I feel a kind of kinship with these objects, a strange sense that they want to aid our cause. Still, should we seek to build on Din's designs for our own armory, I recommend doing away with the admittedly striking eye motif. Perhaps our own symbol would be a good replacement. Before I sign off, there's also the other matter you asked me to look into. I can confirm that the Bulwark of Legend was among the artifacts abandoned in the tower, and if the rest of our contact's information is solid, then I will also concede that it does indeed share some similarities with the doors of Din. It is my hypothesis that the Bulwark was intended for some kind of early prototype, but it's missing some key factor that made the doors fit for purpose. An issue I discovered quite by chance after freezing an assistant during testing. That one will need replacing, I'm afraid. How much do we know about Din's life, his interests, his allegiances? I sense the power of the Dark Altar in his work, but cannot entertain the idea that this lowly smith somehow learned more about it than you or I have managed. No, he must have obtained this power by some other means. In any case, this missing piece of the puzzle has given me an idea. If we did decide to follow our contact's proposed course of action and weaken the doors, all we'd need to do is remove or weaken this extra layer of protection. We already know that without Din's knowledge and expertise, the doors cannot be repaired to the same standard. He took no apprentices. His hammer is well defended in territory we control. I'm not suggesting that we indulge our contact's ridiculous plan, of course. But, if managed carefully, the weakening of Kourend's only defense against the Wintertod would make a marvelous distraction from our true goal. Regardless, it's something of a moot point. When such powerful magic is involved, any disruptive action would be on the scale of decades, not days. But I suppose there's no harm in having a contingency plan. We have all the time in the world. Yours faithfully, X. Kourend Chronicles Part 3. The Plot and the Potion. The rain hissed across the cobblestone as the thief swept silently through the shadows. At this time of night, in this weather, the streets of Kingstown were practically deserted. But through the rain, she could just make out the silhouette of her target, shifting from foot to foot as they huddled beneath the doorway of Counselor Hughes' former residence. Despite the miserable weather, the thief felt a shiver of excitement run up her spine. Since the arrest of Counselor Hughes a few weeks ago, the saviors of Kourend had been surveying the area to see if the cult of Yama returned to the scene of the crime. But this was the first time anything interesting had happened. As the door opened and the hooded figure hurried inside, the thief dashed forward. A convenient gap in the wrought iron fence let her wiggle through and scuttle over to the window. She wiped away the grime with the corner of her sleeve. From here, she could clearly see the dining room, and the overhang of the eaves let her shelter from the rain a little too. It didn't look like a demon ritual. The former counselor's home was brightly lit by candles. There wasn't a cobweb in sight. On the table, where the thief had expected to see an unnamable implements and bloody chalices, was a tastefully painted ceramic fruit bowl. The thief tried not to feel too disappointed. The hooded figure removed their cloak and hung it up on a hat stand by the door. He didn't look much like a cultist either. He was old and almost entirely bald except for the ring of lanky gray hair hanging around his ears. In every other respect, he looked like every other person in Kingstown. Posh, maybe, but not a demon-worshipping madman. Then again, Sophia Hughes had looked the same up until her arrest. The man remained by the door, still shivering from the cold. The thief craned her neck to see if she could spot who he was speaking to, but her view was obscured by an ornate trophy cabinet. She was about to climb back through the fence to see if she could get a better vantage point when a snippet of conversation caught her interest.
"We must do something about the girl," he said.
"What girl?" The thief settled back down among the roses. "No, it's too soon. It would only arouse further suspicion," said the other person in the room. It was another man, the thief guessed. The voice seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it.
"Too soon?"
the man by the door scoffed.
"I'd say we're nearly too late. Sophia is in prison. Counselor Hughes will not betray us. How can you be sure?"
For a moment there was no sound but the pitter-patter of the rain against the eaves. Then the hidden figure spoke. "When we began this enterprise, we made an agreement."
"And you think she to keep it? The woman's mad, conducting insane rituals, dealing with demons. How can we still trust her after all this?"
"Calm yourself," the other cultist snapped.
"If Sophia goes to trial, and lets even the tiniest thing slip,
Counselor Hughes will let nothing slip. She will not get the chance." The man by the door opened his mouth, but ultimately remained silent. Outside the window, the thief closed her eyes and did her best to commit the conversation to memory. "Do you need further assurances?" The man by the door shook his head. "Speak up, will you?"
"No," he said. "I understand."
"Now, what's this about a girl?" The thief's ears perked up again.
"We're already under so much scrutiny. Laurie can hardly be trusted. And then there's the matter of this adventurer, poking their nose where it doesn't belong."
"Oh, please." The other cultist dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "We've taken every precaution."
"And what if it's not enough?"
It was the other cultist's turn to hesitate. "Listen, I've had years to think this through. The only way we can protect ourselves is to be rid of the witness. Wouldn't that be kinder than all this cloak and dagger nonsense?" A shadow passed over the window, and the thief ducked out of view beneath the sill just in time. "We'll just announce that she passed away," the cultist continued, darkly. "Who would question us?"
"What's this all really about?"
the other cultist asked. A fearful silence descended. When the cultist by the window spoke again, he did so quietly that the thief had to strain her ears to hear.
What we did, what we've been doing, it's terrible, evil.
It's what you agreed to, said the other cultist. It's what we all agreed to.
And when we get caught, the 5 houses will have our heads.
If we get caught, follow the plan and everything will be fine. Above the window, the cultist made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a sob.
Fine. Don't tell me you still believe what that man, that thing, told us. You don't really think he's just doing us a favor, do you?
Be very careful what you say, the other cultist hissed. You never know who might be listening. Beneath the windowsill, the thief froze, but at the sound of footsteps across the wooden boards, she exhaled slowly, before peeking into the window again. From the back, the man looked a little more familiar, but she still couldn't place him.
Perhaps you're right.
The other cultist's voice was perfectly neutral. The man looked up at him expectantly. But it doesn't matter. One way or another, the girl will soon be removed from the equation. Then nothing will stand between us and absolute power. The first cultist sighed. Whether in relief or exacerbation, the thief couldn't tell. Her thoughts were racing. A girl, a witness, a stranger, a terrible crime. What did it all mean?
What about the potion?
The second cultist asked. All prepared. I'll deliver it within the week. The second cultist nodded, satisfied.
Then let's try and keep our heads until this situation resolves itself.
The pair were making their way towards the door. The thief hesitated, unsure if she should follow them. In any other situation, she'd be loath to abandon her watch, but this was urgent. If there was a witness to be dealt with, the cultist could only be talking about one girl. She had to warn her before it was too late. There was not a second to waste. As the first cultist wrapped himself in his cloak and said his goodbyes, the thief darted through the fence and raced as quick as she could back to the Warrens. There would be time to find the cultist later. Right now, she had to get home. The Queen was in danger. Kourend Chronicles, Part 4, A Kingdom United. On any ordinary day, the Grand Museum of Civitas Illifortis would be bustling with visitors, hoping to get a glimpse of all the rare treasures within. The icon of Ralos, the armor of the Cloud Titan, and of course, the Royal Accord of Twill. Finally taking pride of place in the glass cabinet found in the Hall of Kourend's center. Queen Ziani Archon stood by the glass, looking over the aged parchment with a practiced eye. The fat, pale snake that habitually hung around her shoulders flicked its tongue and gently bumped its snout against the glass.
You can hardly tell that it's a replica,
she remarked. The curator beside her smiled, but didn't seem quite sure what to say. She was too busy eyeing the snake, no doubt hoping it already had its lunch. The pair of Koltai on the other side of the Queen impassively stood by.
Of course, after the last incident, I don't blame them for at least sending a copy.
The Queen continued.
It's really quite fantastic workmanship.
The third Koltai, Yora, was doing their level best to remember their training and remain still as a statue. In just under an hour, Yora would meet the High Priest to hand over their predecessor's dagger and cement their place as one of the Koltai. All those years in the army, and all the rigorous training they'd undergone as a Knight of Varlamore, had been building up to this very ceremony. But Yora felt as though Ozama's dagger was burning a hole through the ceremonial pouch hanging from their waist. It was all they'd thought about since they'd received it that morning. If it was lost, then so was Ozama's memory, along with Yora's place in the Koltai. Every so often, they felt a sudden urge to check that it was still there, although of course they didn't act on it. A Koltai must never be distracted from their one critical purpose, to protect the Queen. Nonetheless, a distraction there was, a flash of light between the columns that told the story of Kourend's history. A person? Yora's eyes narrowed. Nobody except the Queen, her Koltai, the Curator, and the High Priest had clearance for this area, but none of them had any reason to be sneaking around. Subtly, so as not to distress the Queen, they craned their neck. Yes, moving down the room just past the column of Emaphor's betrayal was a bone-white cloak. As soon as they saw it, it vanished again. Yor made eye contact with one of the other Koltai and nodded firmly. One of them whispered something in the queen's ear. Her snake tilted its head, curious.
An excellent suggestion.
She said, turning towards the clueless curator.
I'd like to see the Tempestus model. It's new, isn't it?
The queen effortlessly hefted the snake across her shoulders, and the group eased away. Yor let themselves relax somewhat. Whoever the interloper was, the queen was at least out of their reach. Silently, Yor readied their hosta and advanced down the center of the hall, eyes darting to and fro. Another flash of white? Just a ray of light reflecting off an old Corundian shield. Another, now Yor was certain. They were not alone. A creak of ancient wood pinpointed the intruder's location, the dagger room, at the end of the hall. Yor's heart leapt into their mouth. If you planned to steal a Koltai dagger, there was no better time to do it than in an initiation ceremony, the one time when every eye in the kingdom would be otherwise occupied. In a single, graceful movement, they kicked the door open, ready to strike. "State your business," Yor called. "This is a restricted area." Nothing. Only the rows and rows of Koltai daggers, arranged neatly by the ruler under which their owner served. A glittering array of gold and blue, and nothing else. Yor glanced up at the ceiling and found it equally empty, and stepped cautiously into the room. It was impossible, they thought. As they slowly peered behind each cabinet, they'd seen the intruder enter, and the only exit was the door back to the Corundian hall. There wasn't even a window to jump through. No human being could hide so well. "Reveal yourself and state your business," Yor called out again. The sound bounced off of the cabinets, echoing off of the empty walls. With a sudden jolt of fear, Yor clasped their free hand around the pouch at their waist, feeling for the handle of Ozma's dagger. It was still there, cold and ownerless. In a matter of hours, it would sit in one of the many empty spots in Ziani's cabinet, another memorial to a fallen Koltai. Yora exhaled and felt their heartbeat slow to normal. There was no danger. Perhaps they'd never seen anything to begin with. Or perhaps the figure in white was Ozma's spirit, clinging on in hope of one last test. It was as good an explanation as any. Outside, Yor could hear one of the bards from the college striking up a song. The crowd was waiting, and no doubt the queen was waiting too. At least none of the other Koltai had been there to see them barge in on thin air. Shaking their head, they left the room and closed the door behind them. Kourend Chronicles, Part 5, The Man in the Tower. The man in the tower had been there a long while, or so he'd been told, and yet Ik Cho had never seen him before now. He'd looked much like any other human, dry, delicate skin, about 6 feet tall, and with a crop of untidy white hair atop his head. Ik Cho's job was to bring the man food, once in the morning and then again as the sun went down, and then leave him alone. He was not supposed to wait while the man finished eating. He was definitely not supposed to talk to him. But some 2 weeks into Ik Cho's new role, as the man's sole god, he spoke, and Ik Cho spoke back. The man said, "Have you ever heard of a journal?" And Ik Cho replied, "No." Remembering he wasn't supposed to speak, he snatched up the empty tray and scuttled back to his assigned dwelling, where he spent the rest of the day cringing whenever someone said his name in case it was followed by, "The Yukal Ak wants to see you." But nothing happened. When Ik Cho returned in the evening with the usual meal of greenish potatoes, all the man said was, "Thank you." Things continued that way for a while. The food arrived, the man said thank you, and the empty tray was taken away. If the Yokol Ok knew of Ik Cho's transgression, and he surely did, for the Yokol Ok knew everything that happened in this tower, then nothing came of it. So one evening, Ik Cho decided he'd try some more. "What is a journal?" he asked, as the man dug into his meal with his funny little pink claws. Swallowing the mouthful of potato and wiping his mouth, he answered, "A journal is a sort of book." Ik Cho pondered this for a moment. "Do you know what a book is?" the man asked. Ik Cho couldn't help but laugh, loud and crunchy. The man started back. Of course Ik Cho knew what a book was. The tower was full of them.
We have lots of books,
Ik Cho said, once he'd managed to control his laughing fit. Perhaps the books were very rare in the human's dwelling. After all, they looked very delicate compared to the stone tablets the shaman had taught him to read from. Could you get one for me? The man asked. His voice was very quiet. And something to write with. Ik Cho thought for a moment.
I can try,
He said, although in truth he had no idea if he was allowed to do any such thing. The Yokol Ok had very clear he didn't want any more tomes getting covered in slime. There'd been a whole announcement about it, but Ik Cho had been instructed to bring the man food, and whatever else he required. Did humans need books? In the end, he chose a battered-looking tome from the bottom of one of the shelves near the kitchen. It was nothing of value, and the pages were already wrinkled and yellow, so he reasoned it wouldn't be missed. Finding something to write with was a little trickier. Ik Cho had observed the human closely enough to figure out that he couldn't possibly be using those pathetic little claws to carve out letters, and the pages of the book he'd found were so thin and fragile he wasn't sure something light must have been used to write on them. But Ik Cho's dwelling mate, Ekra, was assigned to cleaning duty. He picked up all kinds of interesting things, so when Ik Cho asked him how human books were written, he produced the right tool straight away. A feather. Ekra showed Ik Cho how the humans, and even the Yokolak, would dip the feather into some black, wet substance, and then use it to make words and all sorts of things. It was just what the human was looking for, and Ik Cho wasn't even angry when Ekra made him promise to trade him all his chili potatoes at dinner. He was just excited to see what the man in the cell would do with it. As Ik Cho had expected, the man was delighted with his book. He could be seen scribbling in it at all hours of the day. Ik Cho even began visiting outside his designated feeding times to see him writing and hear his stories. At first, the man didn't much like talking, but as Ik Cho's visits became more frequent and his questions bolder, he began telling all kinds of tales about the outside world. Mountains where blue flames burn, a terrifying monster that froze everyone who came near, red trees that grew so high you couldn't see the top.
Is that what's in your journal?
Ik Cho asked him after one particularly interesting description of a place where enormous trees reached up to the sky.
The places you've been.
The man, Ik Cho had learned that his name was Magnus, shook his head and closed the book. No, son, he said. It's a warning. Ik Cho nodded, although he didn't completely understand. Magnus often said strange things. The fateful day came some months later. Ik Cho had noticed, over his last few visits, that Magnus had been more subdued than usual. His eyes were red and bleary, and his skin was so pale that the light from the crystal beside his cell seemed to glow an eerie blue. Ik Cho waited patiently as Magnus chewed his potatoes and eventually handed them back, only half finished. He suspected there would be no stories today, so he nodded and turned to leave, only for Magnus to reach out through the bars and grab him by the arm.
I need your help,
he hissed, handing Ik Cho the journal. The months of wear and tear had made it even shabbier than before, and several pages had come loose from the binding.
I need you to get this outside,
Magnus said.
To the rest of Kourend. They have to know.
He began to wheeze and cough.
They have to stop him,
Magnus finished. When his coughing fit had subsided, Ik Cho wordlessly handed him a cup of water. Ik Cho hesitating before he answered.
I can try,
he said. He wished he could say more, but that seemed good enough for Magnus. The man let go of the journal and sat back on the patterned flagstones of his cell.
Thank you,
he croaked. Ik Cho scurried out of the prison, clutching the journal tight to his chest. What was he supposed to do? No lizard man had ever left the tower. It was a war zone out there, fit only for the strongest warriors. If the humans caught any one of them off guard, it could spell disaster, and surely the Yokal Ok would not approve. But Magnus was his friend.
I'll take that, please.
Ik Cho froze. Stood on the steps before him was the Yokal Ok himself. He reached out a bony claw for the journal. For a wild moment, Ikcho thought about keeping hold of it, but then the treasonous thought was gone. What was he thinking? The Yokal Ok snatched up the book and opened it, turning his cold blue eyes over Magnus's work.
Yes, this will do nicely,
The Yokal Ok said. He snapped the book shut with a dull thud, turned and stalked back up the stairs. Ikcho's heart sank. The figure paused and looked back towards him.
Excellent work getting him to talk, by the way. You've been most useful.
Then, with a laugh that echoed around the tower's walls, the Yokal Ok left, taking the journal with him. The next day, Ikcho found himself promoted to the Yokal Ok's personal guard. He never did see the man in the cell again, but every so often when he looked out at the tower window at the sprawling human settlements in the distance, he wondered whatever did become of Magnus's journal, and what terrible danger was he trying to warn them about. Kourend Chronicles, Part 6, The Ascent. Since Thana's death, I've had much to think about. My usual research has lost its luster. My every thought is of the Ascent, its mechanisms, and how suddenly it can be snatched away. When we gave up our mortal lives all those years ago, we were promised forever. So what changed? All this time I believed our immortality was a result of our own ingenuity, and now I learn that we're all bound up with the whims of the Dark Altar and those mysterious Tasakal. The device the adventurer found is just one half of the puzzle. If there's a chance, any chance, that what happened to Thana might happen again, then I have to know the whole story. And as any good researcher knows, the only way to discover the truth is to find the primary source. It was with this in mind that I made the decision to climb Mount Kourend and speak to those Tasakal myself. I knew the journey would not be without its dangers, but I felt myself prepared, and it's not as though I have feet to get tired. In truth, however, I must report that what lurks upon that mountain is worse than anything I could have imagined, and the danger, I believe, is to everyone in Kourend and possibly beyond. The climb began easy enough. I quickly spotted a few well-worn shortcuts, and having saved myself a significant chunk of time, decided to pause and admire the view from one of the stopping points. I was recalling a line from Bill of Fare's Philosophy of Darkness when I sensed that I was not alone. Some way up the path, the trader was making his way down from the summit. I had no time for conversation, so I concealed myself behind a nearby outcrop, thinking I might wait until he'd passed. Instead, I found myself witness to a horrifying spectacle. Something so terrible that I hardly know if I can describe it. I'll do my best. As the trader slipped behind the outcrop, I heard him greet someone else on the path. I thought for a second he'd seen me and almost floated sheepishly out from my hiding spot when I heard the trader scream. Of course, I immediately looked to see what was going on and whether I could be of assistance. Not even 6 feet away from me stood the most monstrous creature I've ever laid eyes on. I could not tell if it was human or some sort of ghast. Its skin was white as bone, as was its clothing, but its eyes were a piercing blue, and the way it looked at that poor trader, it seemed much like a cat batting some helpless mouse between its paws. Now, I'm no brave warrior at the best of times, and my instincts told me to remain hidden at any cost. With regret in my heart, I resolved to stay behind the rock and wait for an opportunity to help. An opportunity, I'm afraid to say, that never came. The figure used some sort of spell. I heard the incantation and smelled the telltale whiff of magic in the air. But it was a spell the kind of which I'd never seen before. The poor trader fell to his knees, almost as if pushed by an invisible hand, as a green light enveloped him, then, almost as soon as it began, it was over. I peered out, hoping that the monster was gone. To my shock, it was looking right at me. Just thinking about it makes me shudder. I think I caught it by surprise. I immediately readied a counterspell to defend myself, but no sooner had I raised my arms than it vanished with a blue flash of light. A teleportation spell, presumably, although I didn't believe such a thing to be possible. Now that the danger had passed, I immediately rushed to help the poor trader, who was lying prone in the center of the path. He was quite obviously dead. For a moment I was reminded of poor Thana. I hesitated, thank goodness, because then the body twitched. As I looked on in horror, it stood up and began to stumble down the path toward me. I've seen reanimated monsters before, of course, but this was entirely different. I swear on the dark altar itself, I've never seen magic like it. It was abhorrent, bizarre, dangerous. All of my instincts told me to turn and run, and so I did just that. I'm sorry, Thana. I'm no closer to understanding what happened to you, but something tells me that what I saw today must be another piece of the puzzle. Whatever, or whoever that monster was, it was a darkness I'd never before witnessed, and hope never to do so again. Maury. And that's it, folks. Episode 6 of the Kourend Chronicles, The Ascent. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any suggestions for future videos or narrations, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Worst.